Many people living with MS struggle with the frustration of feeling misunderstood by their loved ones. Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years. So I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. Today, I'll be asking our expert the questions you want answered. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS Navigators will be online throughout today's live program, answering those questions and connecting you to resources. Helping your loved ones understand your diagnosis and what living with MS means for you can be a challenge. Joining us today is Kris Inman, an MS activist, an MS ambassador, and husband to Mariah. Mariah was diagnosed with MS in 2020, and since then, Kris has become an active member of the MS community. Kris believes that his wife's diagnosis has given him purpose, focus, and power to help find the cure for multiple sclerosis. Welcome, Kris. Thanks for being with us today.
John, I am absolutely honored to be here to continue to do any small thing I can do in this fight against MS. A real pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start with some introductions. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and Mariah? And I hope you'll share how Mariah came to be diagnosed with MS.
Absolutely. Happy to. Mariah and I have been together over 30 years. I worked in a very small, very unglamorous radio job doing sports play-by-play, and Mariah ran the board while I did sports, and that's how we met. We've been together over 30 years. We'll be 28 years married this year. Fast forwarding many years later, we had gotten a Peloton bike around Christmas 2020. And as Mariah started riding the bike along with me, she started noticing some strange numbness after each ride. She was dizzy after each ride, and we were certain that she'd pinched a nerve or something along those lines. And as we continued to try and figure out what the heck was going on, because it didn't seem to want to relent, it ultimately ended up, as it so often does, in a visit to the doctor, which after several tests and several theories ended up in a spinal tap, which confirmed the unfortunate diagnosis of MS for her. And it seemed to come, as I know it does for so many, absolutely out of the blue, out of nowhere. We didn't see any signs of it prior to that, but it made its presence known. And once diagnosed, we knew the fight that we had on our hands.
Speaking of that, in the days following that diagnosis, how did you and Mariah each process her diagnosis?
I'm really glad you asked me that question, John. I think it's important to share with people that while that diagnosis is certainly a difficult blow for anyone diagnosed, and that is certainly true of my wife, Mariah, oftentimes the loved ones feel it just as hard. And for me, as a fixer and someone who always needs to swoop in and take care of problems, and I'll fix that, honey, I'll take care of that, this was the first time in our relationship that I couldn't fix it. So while it was a blow for Mariah, certainly, and she struggled to come to terms with it, she's a healthcare provider in her job, in her profession. So she came around to it. She actually took it better than I did. But my struggle really was, how do I help? What do I do? I'm powerless here. She needs me. She's counting on me. And for the first time in our relationship, I can't do anything. So I had to relearn how to love her, how to be there for her in the face of this diagnosis. I didn't know. So I'm happy to report that Mariah, who certainly has her struggles, I know we'll talk about that, took it far better than I have. I'm still struggling with it to this day, but the MS Society has certainly helped me reconcile that a bit.
You know, because MS impacts so many more women than men, they represent like 2/3 of the MS population. Often their partner is going to be a man. And I think you just beautifully described what all of us in that position tend to go through. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did Mariah share her diagnosis with her immediate family? And was this the same or different from how you guys chose to share her diagnosis with extended family and friends?
You know, Mariah is by her nature a relatively private person, whereas I tend to be the extrovert in the relationship. I know you haven't figured that out yet about me.
You're the broadcaster, man.
Exactly. It's hard to get Mariah to talk. It's hard to get me to shut up. So we kind of found a place in the middle after her diagnosis, realizing that it was going to become pretty apparent to our friends and family that there was something going on. Some of the elements of MS, as we all know, you simply can't hide. So Mariah made a point, along with me, to make the announcement to family and friends. We went social media public with it right away. I felt like in doing that, we would be able to marshal our forces, so to speak, not only in support of Mariah, but in support of the cause, which I started to learn about almost immediately. And that cause, the MS Society, certainly a champion for that cause, needs all of us. So we chose to take the road of, hey, she's got this. It's not the road we planned, but it's the road we're on, and we need you all on that road with us. That resulting support has been remarkable. Mariah has felt it. I certainly have too. And that is kind of how we came forward with it. And it has been very positive since then.
A minute ago, you mentioned having to sort of relearn your role in the relationship with a partner who was diagnosed with MS. I'm wondering, do you consider yourself a care partner for Mariah?
I do. I do. And funnily enough, there are instances when Mariah is my caretaker, when she has to grab me by my figurative lapels and say, Christopher, I'm okay. I'm going to have my struggles here and there, and it's going to be tough here and there, but I'm okay. And I'm going to be okay, and I need you to be. So I've had to learn that from her. I'd love to be able to tell you and all of our listeners today that, as a caregiver, and I do consider myself that certainly to a large degree, I was there to help to quote unquote school Mariah on what we needed to do and how we needed to do it. She's been that for me far more than I've been that for her. So I think the message here is a broad one, and that is just because you're diagnosed with MS doesn't mean you're suddenly meek or in need of desperate help or unable to take care of anybody around you. Mariah, who's always been a caretaker of sorts because of the job that she does, continued to be that person for all of those around her who struggled with this diagnosis and for me. So in a lot of ways, I feel kind of guilty because she spent so much time propping me up that you'd think it was me that was diagnosed with MS. But yeah, to a degree, certainly, I am a caregiver for her, but I would tell you that she's every bit as much a caregiver for me, MS be darned.
I also heard you mention how we men we fix things,
Mm,
we resolve the issue, right? And so when you're put in the role of being a caregiver and you have that propensity to want to fix things, it's very easy to over help.
yeah.
How do you balance providing support and help for Mariah while still respecting her ability to be independent?
Well, the first thing I had to do, John, is get out of my own head and get out of my own way, so to speak. I noticed right after the diagnosis, I went down some dark paths. I started drinking more than I had. I started socially withdrawing more than I had. And again, she needed to shake me by my figurative lapels and remind me that this is not the road we planned. So often life changes our paths, and it doesn't mean that we're still not driving down them. So I had to learn through my own experience to take care of myself so that I could help take care of her when she needed it, so that I could help take care of others with MS as I've gotten more involved with the MS Society. And again, being that fixer and not being able to fix anything felt like a dead end. But as soon as I started reaching out to the community at large, other folks with MS, other families taking care of folks with MS, and certainly all the amazing folks at the MS Society, which I did almost right away. I reached out to the MS Society in desperation, asking if there was anything I could do. I offered to sweep floors, to clean up concession areas, anything I could do. I started to see a path forward of positivity in ways that I could help, small though they may be, to kind of get me out of my head, get me off of Mariah's back, and get back on the path we're supposed to be on.
So tell me a little more about your involvement in supporting the MS community.
It has come to mean so very, very much to me, the society and the community at large. And as I mentioned, right after Mariah's diagnosis and right after I started going through all of this, and by the way, I'm happy to report that I no longer drank. I stopped all of that, got control of who I was, realizing what I was trying to do to myself there. And I called the MS Society. I found a number online and I called them. And I don't even remember who I talked to, but I literally just pleaded. And I think I was crying and super passionate. Just everything kind of came out in that moment. And I said, how can I help? Please put me to work. I don't have many skills. I speak to people for a living. So if I can do that, I'll do it, but I'll do anything you need, anything you need. And she was so welcoming and so supportive of that, I immediately heard back from the society. They immediately put me to work on our local Bike MS. Mariah and I together have emceed local events together since then, and our cooperation with the society has certainly grown over the years. But that's the first thing I did. That's how I started to channel this need to help. And I started to meet these remarkable human beings who are not only doing the kinds of things that you do, John, and the kinds of things that other folks in the society are doing, but the folks with MS who are heroic in the way they take this and the way they model what it is to have this disease and charge forward with a smile and positivity. And so that started to empower me in ways I couldn't have imagined. And now every time I get a chance to do anything with this community, it's everything to me.
Given the day-to-day uncertainty of MS, it can be tricky trying to make plans to attend events or outings. What advice do you have for family members of people who are living with MS to help them manage expectations when it comes to attending social events or get-togethers?
You have to listen to that person and you have to respect the idea that because of this overwhelming MS fatigue, we talk about MS being a fingerprint disease. It's a little different for everybody, but certainly that fatigue is something that almost everyone with MS goes through. And Mariah describes it as a fatigue unlike any you've ever experienced, in which no amount of sleep can even sort of start to settle it. So you have to understand that even when they appear okay, they've got at the very least that going on. So Mariah and I used to go to a lot of concerts and we get out and about quite a lot, but I've come to recognize, and I would advise others who are living with or caring for people with MS to do the same. They're going to put on a brave face for you. A lot of times they're going to tell you, yes, they'll go do these things, but they aren't always ready to rock and roll as they once were. So understand they aren't firing on the same cylinders. They're still firing, but not on all the same cylinders. And be okay with that. Respect that. Don't be so aggressive in the ways that you used to be with regard to getting out and about and doing all the things, because they're going to need some time. So make sure that you understand that, respect that, and give them that as needed.
We heard from Lucas, who tells us he's 34. He was diagnosed with MS at the age of 27. Lucas and his wife have a young son who just turned 1. Now that their baby is mobile and on the go, Lucas is finding it much more difficult to care for him. He feels guilty. Lucas wants to be a reliable partner and parent, but his symptoms just get in the way. What advice would you share with Lucas?
And Lucas, I would say this first and foremost, because I've watched Mariah go through something similar, not with a child, but just in her own expectations of herself. Mariah always set an incredibly high bar for her own performance, whether it be as a wife, as a professional, and she continued right after her diagnosis to set the bar impossibly high. So I would say to Lucas, just like I said to Mariah, you can still be incredible at whatever it is you aspire to do, whether you're a nurse or a parent or whatever it is, or all those things. But set a realistic bar for yourself. Because when you set an impossible bar to reach, you're only going to experience a sense that you're not succeeding. And that's going to feed into itself and create stress. And we all know, any of us with experience with MS know, that stress and MS do not go well together. So Lucas, you're still amazing. You're still doing an incredible job. And just because it's not the bar that you think it should be doesn't mean it's not the bar that everybody needs. Give yourself a little bit of grace. MS demands that. You're still amazing doing what you do. Just understand that and lower that bar just a little bit, because that grace is something you have to give you. We can't do it as much as we want to for you.
Noel tells us she lives with MS and she lives alone in a small apartment attached to her parents' house. Noel's parents are in their 70s, and they're her main support when it comes to managing her MS. Noel knows that she needs to make some decisions regarding her future care. She knows her aging parents just won't be able to provide help in the long term. What advice would you share with Noel and her parents when it comes to planning for her future care needs?
I'm an old emergency communications guy. I retired after a long career in the 911 industry. And one of the things you learn is that you have to prepare just in case. You have to make plans, and it's okay to make those plans. Sometimes when we make plans for something unknown, it can make that unknown a little bit more scary. And sometimes that prevents us from even getting into the plans to begin with. So I would suggest, not only to her, but to people in that situation, sit down and make a plan together. Each of you be a part of that plan. Map out what the next 5 years look like. And you may have to discuss some uncomfortable truths when you do that, but that's okay. Making that real doesn't make it more scary, it just makes it more manageable. So I would suggest to anybody who has an uncertain future ahead of them, sit down and add certainty to that future by coming up with a plan to attack that future and do it together. Everyone be a part of that. And I'm sure that those parents would very much love to take that on and be a part of that answer for the future. So don't be afraid to wade into the unknown, as scary as it can be, because that's where certainty can come in.
It's completely natural for their loved ones to want to support someone who's living with MS, but those intentions can sometimes get overrun by toxic positivity. When someone uses unrealistic, overly positive statements to minimize a difficult situation, I remember going through some of that. I'm sure you're nodding your head. That sounds familiar to you as well. Do you know whether Mariah has experienced that? And if she has, how did those kinds of comments make her feel?
You know, that comes from good intentions. I think most people want to say something that's comforting, or they want to tell you about their aunt's cousin's best friend who had MS, but was still able to golf, walking 18 holes for 40 straight years. They mean well. The folks who suggest that if you eat a chunk of potato cooked just a certain way and laid in the sun for only 2 days a week will help to cure your MS. She got a lot of that too. And at first was very irritating to her. But ultimately, I think she's come to the understanding that everybody just wants to help. To people who do that, I would suggest, as I've had to suggest to myself, sometimes you don't have to have an answer. Oftentimes with MS, there's not an answer to have. And some of the best support that we can offer folks with MS, and certainly know this firsthand as I know you do, John, is to just shut up and listen. As Mariah has tried to tell me throughout our marriage, even before MS, Christopher, I don't need you to fix this. I just need you to shut up and listen while I tell you about it. That catharsis will help me. And that's certainly true when it comes to living with someone with MS, befriending someone, or loving someone with MS. You don't always have to go to them with a solution. You don't have to force positivity if they're having a bad day. Just be there, listen, and let them know you're available if they need you.
You brought up Mariah's fatigue a little while ago. Those invisible symptoms can be particularly tough for someone living with MS to explain to others because, as you know, you look so good, right? That's the comment. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for how to help loved ones better understand those invisible symptoms.
If you know someone with MS, they're going through something all the time, all the time. Chances are pretty good underneath the surface. It's pretty hardcore at times. Mariah, for example, struggles with 24/7, 365 terrible vertigo. It doesn't ever relent. Nothing that she's taken really impacts it. Some days it's a little worse than others, but on the days that it's terrible, she's largely incapable of doing a whole lot. So I would suggest to anyone, when you see someone with MS, understand there's something going on under the surface. It may be a little less than yesterday, it may be a little more, but people with MS are driven to hide that stuff. At least the folks I know. They want to put on the brave face. They don't want to share their quote unquote misery with all the folks around them and dump that on them. They've all got their own problems. They don't need to constantly hear about mine too. So it's our job as the folks who love them to understand, while they may not always voice what they're going through, it's always there. We have to be understanding of that. You have to assume that there's something going on under the surface. And again, I'll return to what we just talked about, John. You don't have to fix that. You just have to acknowledge that, respect that, know that that's going on. Let them dictate to you exactly what goes forward from there with regard to activities, that sort of thing. But I've never known anyone with MS, and all the folks I've met, who don't have something percolating under the surface. As people who love them, we need to be aware of that.
Good advice. Close friends and family, though they can play an important role in building out a dedicated support circle. I'm wondering whom you have called upon with your extended support circle, and I hope you'll share some examples of how members of a support circle can do those little things that can go such a long way to help someone living with MS.
You know, John, I lean into friends and family. I've learned as I've gotten older and had personal loss over the years, as we all do, that there are some things we just can't handle on our own. And I know in my 20s and 30s, certainly I was of a mind that I was bulletproof and there was nothing I couldn't take on. But as I got in my 40s and 50s, life happens. Things start to happen. Life conspires to teach you lessons that you need to learn. So I learned to lean on folks who love us and care about us. And that's what both Mariah and I have done. I'm on the road a lot in my current line of work, and I've have very close friends that I run into a lot, and I talk to them about what's going on, and I accept their support and I feel that support. Mariah does as well. We don't always talk about MS. It's not always front and center. Certainly with Mariah, she's not going to lead with, "Hi, I'm Mariah, I have MS." But just knowing that people have your back, knowing that people are there for you, knowing that if you're having a terrible day, the people who love you are okay with that. They understand what that is. They don't match your emotion. They just let it happen. That's the sort of support that when you're going through something like this, you have to have. So I strongly suggest to folks who are maybe withdrawing with their MS diagnosis, or maybe they're kind of on an island, lean into the people who love and care about you. You will find support there that will help you in ways you can't even imagine. It feels like the weight of it is less when you're willing to lean on folks and let them carry a little bit of it with you, because they will. They're there for that. I can't encourage it more strongly.
Have you and Mariah used any specific resources to help others better understand MS?
Just through our volunteer work with the MS Society, certainly we've shared a lot of that. As I mentioned earlier, we've gotten the opportunity to get involved with our local MS folks. We've done a lot of emceeing of local events. We've spoken with groups locally about MS through these events, gotten to know people as well. I've gotten the opportunity, as has Mariah, to talk to freshly diagnosed folks about what's ahead and about how there are resources out there. I think the best message that we got and give is that you are not in this alone. It's such a lonely feeling diagnosis, as if no one can understand. But then you start to realize there's a huge community of people out there who can completely understand and who want to be your support system. So it's been through that we've been able to share what we've learned with other people and be that support system for them. And you can see the look on people's faces when they realize there are people here who know what this is, who've gone through this, and who are here with me. And it creates a bond unlike any other.
Given all the ways you've found to get involved, what advice would you share with someone who's looking for ways to become more involved with the MS community?
Contact the MS Society. Reach out to the MS Society. I know that they can use help in all facets. There is an incredibly strong group of volunteers, activists, and ambassadors throughout the society, folks who aren't getting paid a cent, but the pay that they get is far more than money can give. And I know that help is needed around the country. So if you are like I was, if you're just desperate to do something, anything in a scenario in which you feel like you can't do much, and maybe what you're turning to instead is something that's a little self-destructive, pull yourself out of that. First and foremost, the person who loves you needs you at your best. Secondly, call the MS Society. Reach out to someone local. Reach out to someone at the national level. Find a 1-800 number. Reach out to whoever you need to and just volunteer your time. And I promise you, if you do that, that what you get from that is incredibly powerful, incredibly empowering, because once you feel like you're part of the fight, it's a whole different ballgame. Now, I still can't fix it, and neither can you, but together we can start to find a fix for all of us.
Well, you've shared some excellent insights about how to go about helping others better understand a loved one's MS diagnosis. What would you say is the top takeaway that you'd like our viewers to remember and use?
Well, for those of you who are freshly diagnosed, you're not alone. You are never alone. As lonely as it can feel, you aren't. There is a community with their arms open, waiting for you, to take you in, to give you the support that you need. Please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out there and let that support envelop you. Number two, love people that you know with MS. If you have someone in your family who has MS, as I do, just love them. You don't have to smother them with that love. You don't have to overwhelm them with answers and ideas and thoughts and this and that. There's peace and silences. Sitting down with a cup of coffee and streaming shows. One of our favorite things to do is our cats trample over the top of us. Find a way to support that person who you love with MS that doesn't require them to also have to balance all the stuff you're throwing at them. I've had to learn to listen better, and you will too, but in doing that, you can be a resource for them. That's absolutely invaluable.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Kris.
Thanks so much for having me, John. It's been a real pleasure.
Today's program survey has now been posted in the chat for your feedback. Please take a minute and complete it to help us create programs and topics with you in mind. Please be sure to visit the National MS Society's website for information and resources on MS, connection opportunities, and ways for you to get involved. You can also connect with an MS navigator to receive personalized support by phone, email, or through the Society's website. by chat. A recording of today's program will be posted on the MS Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSExpert, as well as on Facebook and on YouTube. Finally, I'll invite you to join me each week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where we continue the conversation that we start here. You can find Real Talk MS on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Thanks for joining us for Ask an MS Expert. We'll see you next week.